So we're looking at patterns and gradients. So we've already learned how to fill objects with color. What about if we want something a little bit more advanced, like a gradient or a pattern? So let's look at gradients first. So this activity, from the previous activity, we created our color swatches for this artwork. So that's a good starting point for creating gradients. So I'm going to go to my gradient panel, and I'm going to make a new gradient. So here is the gradient ramp, and here's some gradient presets. Well, there's none there at the moment. So I'm going to double click on the left-hand color stop, and you'll see that I can switch to my color swatches here. And I want to make one that goes from this tangerine color. Okay, so that will be my left-hand color, to, on this side, the vanilla color. And then I want to add a new color stop in the middle, so I move my mouse over the bottom of the color ramp and click to add a new color stop. I want it to be at exactly 50% location, so in other words halfway, and I'm going to double click on that one and choose the caramel color. So my gradient goes from tangerine to caramel to vanilla. Now I need to save this gradient so that I can use it whenever I want to. So I'm going to go to my swatches panel, and I'm then going to drag this gradient from my fill color here across and drop it in here. And you'll see that it gets added to wherever I was previously. So I'm just going to double click on it and call it background gradient. Okay. Now to apply it, I simply select the object and then click on the gradient. Now I could go back to the gradient panel and I could adjust things like the angle and reverse the colors and choose between linear and radial, and that's fine. But what is much more useful is to use the gradient tool. So if I grab the gradient tool, you'll see it gives me this little widget over the object that has the gradient applied. Now I can go over this and you'll see there's various things that happen. So if I go to the far side here and drag, I can adjust the position of the gradient. If I go to this side and drag, I can change the length of the gradient. If I go a little bit away, I can rotate the gradient. So I'm just going to rotate it 45 degrees, and I'm going to move it down. And then you see I can take the color stops and I can adjust their position. I can even drag them off if I don't want them on there. I can even click and add new color stops to the gradient. So this little widget is actually pretty powerful. So I'm just going to go for something like that, which is what I want. All right, so I'm going to selection tool, click away, and now I want to make a new gradient. So I'm just going to start with my default colors, so D for black and white. And okay, it's not giving me the black and white. Normally I get the black and white gradient here, but that's fine. I'm just going to double click and edit this. I'm going to go from, I'm going to drag the orange off, and I'm going to put the caramel there, the vanilla in the middle at 50%, and then I'm going to make white on this side. Okay, and I'm then going to add that to my swatches, and I'm just going to call it vanilla gradient. Okay, so I'm going to take this object here and I'm going to apply that gradient, and I'm going to go back to my gradient panel and I'm going to click radial gradient. I'm also going to reverse the colors so that the white is in the middle. And then I'm going to go to my gradient tool, and now I can adjust things like the position, the scale, and so on. So I just want it to look something like that. Okay, so that's how gradients work. And it's just important to remember to save the gradients, because the things that you do in here, like using your gradient tool to rotate the gradient and change the beginning and end point, that doesn't get saved in the swatch. What gets saved in the swatch is simply the color stops and the position of those color stops. So that's gradients. And one more type of gradient I want to look at, which is the a more free-form gradient. So I'm going to take this shape here. I'm going to double-click on it to isolate it. And I'm going to go back to gradients, and I'm going to choose this option, which is free-form gradient. And that puts these spots, which are gradient color stops, in a free-form space. So I'm going to go to my colors here, and I'm going to say I want, let's say I want blue there, and then click, I want vanilla there, and I want caramel there. So you see the way it's a very organic way of creating shading. So if I now double click away, you can see that I've got an interesting gradient there. I'm not saying this looks great, but you get the idea. All right, so much for gradients. Let's look at patterns. So this here is a pattern on this cone, but it's not a very efficient way of making a pattern. So if I double click on it, you'll see that it's these lines. I'm going to get rid of these lines. And what I want to do is make a pattern that I can put inside here and control. So I'm going to go to the side here, and I'm going to make a square and fill it with purple. I'm in isolation mode. Let me just cut it, go out of here. Okay, there we go. So fill that with purple, and then I want to go to transform scale and make a copy at 70% and say copy. And for the copy, I'm going to have no fill, and I'm going to put a stroke of caramel and give it a stroke of 3 points. So this could be anything. I'm also going to expand this so that it's no longer a stroke, it's actually an object. It's just always safer to do that. So I've got this that I want to turn into a pattern. I'm going to select it, object, pattern, make. And then I'm just going to call this cone and say done. And now I have my cone pattern here. I can delete the original artwork. Now I can go to that cone, and I'm going to apply that pattern. Now the pattern is way too big here, and also it's being applied to the stroke. So I do not want a stroke. I want to just bring the fill to the front and apply the pattern to the fill. And then I'm going to go object, transform, scale, and I only want to scale the pattern, not the object. So I'll uncheck object, and then I'll bring the scale down to 12% and say OK. And then I'll say object, transform, rotate, and let's say I want to rotate to 45 degrees and OK. So that's a much nicer way of working with patterns. And you'll see that my pattern is in my swatches panel. Okay, and anything can be a pattern. So this yum yum text could become a pattern. Basically, any type of artwork can be turned into a pattern. I would say the only caution is to keep your artwork simple when you're creating patterns to get more predictable results. Okay, so give it a try.